Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords just put out a pretty big update that has some really spicy changes that is sure to shake up gameplay. So let's get right into it. Here in the general section is mostly just kind of quality of life and aesthetic changes, nothing that is going to really impact your gameplay too much. They've updated some of the voiceovers, updated some sound effects, and fix some crash issues as well as some UI improvements. So always great to see that, but not worth spending too much time talking about. Next up, the gameplay changes. So first off, the spiderlings would now die as soon as they take any damage whatsoever. Previously, HP-based damage would take many seconds to kill them. So things that dealt a percentage of your maximum health, things like Enigma ult or the fire burn from, say, Hobgin's Molten Armor, would really struggle to kill the spiderlings from the insect bonus right away. So that is a good, well, that's like a nerf, kind of like a consistency issue, because sometimes they'd be on fire for many seconds and they wouldn't ever die. So it's definitely a nerf towards insects. Spiderlings no longer have alliance buffs applied to them with the exception of trolls, since it affects attack speed. That's kind of minor. I don't think that really changes much of anything, because once again, any damage is going to kill them. So if you give any kind of damage reduction buff or anything along those lines, it's not really going to help them. So good to see. And fix an issue where assassins would not jump if they had a castable item equipped. And that was a very interesting thing that sometimes assassins just would not jump. I've encountered that bug several times myself, and good to see that has been sorted out and figured out why that was happening. And also, round damage is back. This is a pretty big change. 1 damage per every 10 rounds of the game. For example, 1 damage bonus on rounds 10 to 19, 2 at round 20 to 29, and so on. And that's really big, because I've definitely noticed that the games have been going longer and longer. I'm sure you've noticed that my gameplay videos have been ticking up in length simply because games are going longer. They're going longer rounds, and the rounds themselves just take more time to complete. So increasing the damage output on the player is going to reduce the game time for sure, in not only in terms of time on the clock, but also time in the number of rounds. We will rarely see games start going past 40 rounds every single time. I know I've had a couple of games recently. I was actually just in a tournament game earlier today where it went to round 50, which I had never seen before. I wasn't in it. I got eliminated in third, but the top 2 players went to round 50, and that's just way too long. That's like over an hour of game length, and that's got to be cut down. So this round damage is going to disincentivize people who are on hard losing streaks. They're going to be eliminated a little bit quicker, but it doesn't start until after round 10. So 1 damage starting on round 10. So feel free to still continue losing streaks in the early game. That is unaffected. But once you hit round 10 and so on, you want to start winning those rounds so that you don't take too much damage. Okay, the jail has been updated, and I'm sure you all know that I've got the updates on the daily jail update, and this is a big change. I actually didn't even check in game if the jail got updated again, because I know it just updated about 20 minutes before this update came out, or 15 minutes, actually only 14, before this update came out. So I had recorded my daily jail update, and we'll see if it gets messed up by this. But in any case, when the jail concepts succeeded at keeping the game fresher day after day, the initial implementation made it so certain alliances were overly punished, Scrappies and Inventors, while others like Assassins and Hunters are virtually unaffected most of the time. And that's something I've discussed at length in other videos. You can check out the link to those in the description below. In order to address some of these problems, we had changed the jail algorithm a little bit. Every day between 8 to 12 heroes are jailed. Up to 3 heroes from a single alliance can be banned rather than just 1 per alliance. And this means that some days certain alliances will not be fully completable. And it'll show in the UI, there'll be a little mark over the alliance saying, like, if 3 warriors get banned, for instance, you simply won't be able to complete 6 warriors on that day, and it'll be very clear in the UI about that. And then also 1 ace will be jailed every single day. So that's good to see that, that will be rotating through. And sometimes there just will be an ace banned out. And if that's in your strategy, maybe you need to look towards different ones. Heroes from tier 1 to 4 can no longer have more than 1 unit banned over the other tiers. For example, if there's 10 jailed heroes, the jail might look like this. So this is something that I sometimes brought up in my daily jail update, is that, okay, there's a bunch of, 3 heroes banned in one tier, or 4 versus like 0 in another tier, or just 1, would kind of skew the odds on how easy it was to find updates in those certain tiers. So all together, these changes look really important for the jail, and they definitely fix a lot of the complaints that I had about the jail system, and to kind of even out the odds on a lot of the alliances, and hopefully it'll affect things a little bit more evenly. It's not the exact algorithm that I had proposed in my previous video, but it's still a pretty good fix nonetheless. Additionally, some units have changed alliances, which will make more impact across the different alliances, and so of course they're also looking for feedback, so hopefully after playing with this for a while, we can get a better feel for it, but still look forward to daily gel updates talking about all of this as it develops. Next up, they changed the Underlords themselves. So the rank of the Underlords is no longer tied to your player level. All Underlords in the game will now grow steadily in power throughout the game on the same schedule. So instead, previously you would level up your character, so you would level up to say level 7, and then you could put your 7th unit in, but then your Underlord also ticked up in power level. And that's not going to be the case anymore. It'll now go throughout the game. It does not matter how much you level up versus how little and somebody else levels up. Your Underlords are going to be in the same equal footing. Also, Underlords no longer require the hype to cast their abilities, and that was one of the fundamental constants of the Underlords. Abilities will now start on cooldown and will be cast every time their cooldowns are ready. So that means they're going to cast on a set schedule rather than, they're going to start casting their ability 10 seconds into the fight or whatever the timing is, rather than just say, oh, if you didn't get any hype, then you're not going to cast your spell. Now, that's not to say hype is not useful anymore. Hype increases your Underlord's damage output up to plus 50% max total damage at full hype, and how fast their cooldowns tick, up to 40% faster at full hype. So the more hype you're getting, the faster and more often you're going to be casting those spells, rather than just being able to cast them in the first place. So I like that a lot better. It provides a much smoother power curve, as opposed to, oh, I got some of my hype burned, or somebody has an Assassin's Veil and a Sniper, I guess my Underlord's useless. It's never going to cast anything. It's just going to stand there and auto attack. That was definitely a really a feeling a bad moment. It felt really bad that you just have your Underlord standing there and not do anything just because, oh, there's an anti-mage that got on it. Now, it'll definitely reduce their power output, but it won't completely kill them off. And the ultimate abilities can now only be cast once, and that'll be cast on a set cooldown. So they kind of go into some of their explanation here, which is kind of what I had just discussed in a bit more detail. They didn't like how hard it skewed leveling versus rerolling. So spending gold on XP was definitely the most advantageous choice, and really punished some of those heavy reroll strategies to get to 3 stars. So the hope is that now with this change, you can stay at level 8 and reroll for 3 stars and not be so heavily punished when the opposing Underlords are getting to level 9 or 10. They simply won't be much more powerful from an Underlord's perspective. They'll still have more units, of course, but hopefully you counteract that by getting that higher star level units, and they don't just get free Underlord upgrades along the way. They've also gone through a whole bunch of small little tweaks to an Essex and Hobgen, and I'm just going to gloss over some of these because I don't want to get bogged down in the minutia, but things like our passive hype generation has been adjusted a little bit. The Hyper Demon changed. The cooldown on Martyr's Boon, it is now 12.5 seconds, so it'll cast on that set schedule. Of course, the more hype you have, the faster that'll cool down. The healing has increased a little bit, but that is, of course, to make up for the fact that it gets cast at different times, and it no longer targets spiderlings, completely irrelevant. Pure Pain, that talent, that's her other ability. The damage has been increased slightly. One thing I didn't mention that was in here, it says at the maximum power of your Underlords, they're going to be equivalent to the old version of rank 8. So no longer will the Underlords scale up to rank 9 and 10. They're going to cap out at that rank 8. Which means that things like this, the Pure Pain, they need to buff the numbers a little bit to kind of keep it on equal footing in terms of balance from where it was before. Seems like the ultimate for an Essex, Enthrall, or Summon Demonic Golem will be cast 22 seconds into the fight. That's where the ultimate is on here, on a 22-second cooldown. Chaotic Hunter has been buffed. That talent was, they originally was 3 extra shots, and then they thought, oh, that's way too powerful, drop down to 1. They realized that's too weak, so hopefully this 2 extra shots is a good happy medium between picking Chaotic Hunter or Brill Bruiser. I think the other 2 are Rejuvenating Ritual and an End of Medicine. So hopefully we get to see a little bit better balance between those different talents. And they've nerfed Phantom Pain a little bit. The armor per level changed from 2 down to 1, and that's a pretty substantial nerf, but this was probably the default strongest talent at the moment, so good to see that kind of brought in line with some other ones on that tier. The Essex Golem, some stat changes. Looks like it's been buffed up just a little bit, and that's good to see because it was a little bit low impact compared to Enthrall most of the cases. Hobgen has been adjusted in a very similar way. The hype generation has been reduced a little bit to compensate for the rest of the changes to the system. the cooldown has been reduced, and Explosivo's damage has gone up slightly. So a little bit of a, seems like a buff there, but of course these do fall off towards the later game, and we saw the buff to an Essex heal as well to kind of compensate for the fact that it scales a little bit differently. Supercharged, the cooldown has been increased, so you're going to get a little bit less cooldowns, or a little bit less supercharges going out, which is kind of good, because I think Hobgoblin was getting a little bit too strong with just supercharging everybody in sight if he got one or two of them off. Let's Go Crazy, the cooldown once again will cast 22 seconds into the fight. That seems to be their default here for when the ultimates will cast. And a slight adjustment to friendly fire, the round's not going to end when the bombs are exploding, kind of like how Gyrocopter's cooldown will continue to cast, possibly to force a draw or let you take a little bit less damage if that's going out while the fight ends. Afterburn now burns cells adjacent to the target cell. This is a pretty big increase. Previously, Afterburn just burned the one cell where Explosivo landed, and that was just like not very impactful. It's kind of like Viper's Nether Toxin, where it just, people are just, it's just going to affect one target. It's not that big of an impact. So to see that expanded, that is a massive increase in the number of possible cells it'll affect, and the damage per second has been increased, and the duration has decreased to compensate for the increased damage output. So I actually think to see that this will be a very popular talent because of the massive damage increase, because it affects so many more cells, so many more units now, especially if you're going to mage/magic damage build with Hobgen. Drain Bomb, it no longer drains hype, but it does drain now 100 mana from anybody that it hits. I really don't like this talent at all, and I think the best part about that talent was that it drained hype. The fact that it no longer does that just makes this talent, I think, even worse in my estimation, which was kind of hard because it was already really bad. Molten Armor now only ignites adjacent attackers. Oh, that is huge. Along with the change to Keep It Secret. This was kind of like the most impactful Hobgen combo, the Molten Armor, Keep It Secret. You just put Hobgen up front, everybody's going to attack him, they're going to all be set on fire, they're all going to be silenced by Keep It Secret. That was definitely not a good play pattern and made him too strong, too oppressive, and just not fun. If nobody's casting spells, that's not fun for either player. So they changed it so that he only ignites the adjacent attackers, so melee attackers, and doesn't work on against magic immune or invulnerable enemies who, say, have like a BKB or something like that. Keep It Secret has also been nerfed. It now says whenever an enemy is set on fire, so whenever they first get the fire debuff applied, they're silenced for 1.5 seconds. This effect can happen every time the fire expires. So essentially, in order to, you're not going to get a permanent silence anymore. A unit is going to be set on fire, and then they're going to be silenced for a little bit, and then the fire is going to continue burning, and then once it expires, they can be silenced again, but it's only for 1.5 seconds. I actually think this is an incredibly weak talent now. So you're going to have to look towards other talents in this tier, because I think this is just not very relevant. If it's not going to keep them locked down for very long, a 1.5 second silence is not that impactful. Like, what are the odds that they want to cast something in that 1.5 second window? It's pretty low, as opposed to, say, a 1.5 second stun, which obviously they want to auto attack during that window, but they're not able to cast all that consistently. So I really don't think this is a very impactful talent anymore, and I think that's justified. It was definitely not a fun talent for either side to really be playing with. It was a little too boring, a little too straightforward, and just really killed off a lot of compositions. So I'm glad to see this has been nerfed, and we should hopefully see a little bit less Hobgen because of that. But that's not all. They also changed some heroes. Small adjustments. Anti-Mage has his mana break buffed from 2/4/6 up to 4/6/12, a hype burn, and I think that was a good change. His mana break on his or the hype burn just didn't really seem all that impactful, so good to see that increased. Faceless Void, one of the most powerful units in the game, has been substantially nerfed. His effect duration used to be 4, 5, or 6 seconds. It's now down to 2, 3, and 4, so essentially cut in half, at least at 1 and basically 2 star. That is huge. I mean, that Chrono Cube was basically a Tidehunter Ravage that affected the most important units on the enemy team, and it lasted for 4 seconds as opposed to 2. And it was just so massively impactful that pretty much everybody always wanted to run Faceless Void in any composition just because it was so incredibly powerful. So it's no surprise to see that taken down a notch or 2 here. He does get a little bit of compensation. He gets increased attack speed while in it from 50 up to 75 bonus attack speed. But I don't think that's really enough to compensate for this big loss in stun duration. That was really the big appeal, is the stun duration. And of course he gets this attack speed for a shorter amount of time, so it really is an overall nerf. That being said, you still definitely want to be playing him in Primordial builds, since he's a Primordial, probably Assassin builds because it still pairs well with Assassins. You just won't need to splash Faceless Void into literally everything, and hopefully it'll be a little bit less prevalent in the general meta. That being said, I still think he's a pretty decent unit. Okay, they also changed IO. The relocate units will keep their existing cooldowns when brought back. And this is like a really simple line of text, but it actually really affects the unit. So one of the most important parts about IO, or one of the best situations with IO, was you have somebody like Lone Druid, who's a Druid to pair with IO, up in front, and that Lone Druid gets to cast its bear, and then maybe it has a refresher orb or something and casts a second bear, and then it dies. And then IO starts to relocate, pulls back the Lone Druid, and you get 2 more bears. Well, at least one more. But that's a big cooldown, obviously, getting those bears and getting the relocate, and to kind of double dip in that way is very powerful. And of course that won't be the case anymore. So IO will still be very effective bringing back units who have kind of mid to low tier or low level cooldowns, things like Tiny or Tree Ant Protector, or just units who have impactful ability, but it's like a 10-second cooldown or something like that, as opposed to the full 1 minute long cooldowns or even 30-second long cooldowns, won't be able to get as much value out of IO. Still, IO is a great unit, so in a lot of cases it's still just as effective as before, but you can't really cheese that thing with like Lone Druid in particular. Keeper of the Light has been kind of reworked. The channel time has been increased from 3 up to 4 seconds, so it takes a longer time for him to build this up. And the damage per second channeling has been decreased, which means it's an overall nerf to Keeper of the Light. And the damage when fully channeled has been decreased from 450 at 1 star down to 400. It stays the same at 2 star at 600, and 3 star it actually increases slightly up from 750 up to 800. So it's a very slight buff to him at 3 star, but overall he's going to take longer time to channel that, which means it gets a little bit delayed. He takes a little bit longer to get the mana back up right afterwards. So I think this is a fair nerf. I think Keeper of Light was a little bit too strong in the most recent patch. I was pretty much running him in every situation I could, just because that damage output was pretty insane for relatively low investment, because of his mana was brought back down to just require 100. That I think this is a fair adjustment. I don't think you'll really stop playing him or stop playing the builds that he's in because of this. It just kind of brings him down in power level by a notch. But you'll still want to play him in all the same spots and all the same times as before. But on the other case, we've got 2 units here who have changed alliances. And if you've watched me for a while, you know I say whenever an alliance gets changed, whenever a new unit gets added in or changed, the alliances can massively impact the game. So Morphling has changed from an assassin to a mage. No longer is Morphling an assassin, now a mage, which admittedly he always was kind of more like a mage than anything else, because he deals that big AoE magic damage. And his tier has been changed from 2 up to 3. So he's now a 3-cost unit instead of a 2-cost unit. And the maximum mana has been increased up from 75 up to 100. So this mana increase is actually a rather substantial nerf, because it'll take a little bit longer to get his cast off, and he won't be able to cast quite as consistently on cooldown because of that mana change. However, the damage has been increased ever so slightly from 150 at 1 star up to 200, 250 up to 350 at 2 star, and so on. But this is a really weird rework for me. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, but it's hard for me to really parse exactly how this is going to play out. On the one hand, primordial mages are now really, really powerful, because you don't need to dip too far into other builds. You've just got Morphling and Razor as 2 primordial mages, and then just throw in 1 more mage. Somebody like Keeper of the Light, for instance, who, even though he got nerfed, is still quite strong. But you can throw in really just 1 of any other mage, and you can complete that build, and you kind of free up an extra spot where you don't need to run that Lena or that Crystal Maiden or something to complete the mage buff. But also, Morphling is a little bit higher in the tier list, so he's going to be a little bit slower to get online in the early game. Getting a tier 3 unit up to 2 star is quite a bit more difficult than getting a tier 2 unit. You have lower odds for a couple of levels. I don't think you hit maximum tier 3 odds until level 6, whereas you hit maximum tier 2 odds as soon as you hit level 3. You hit level 3, and then 4, and then 5, you kind of have the maximum odds of these tier 2 units. So in the early game, it's going to be much easier to get tier 2 units, and it's a big drop off to get a tier 3 unit upgraded. So see Morphling have a little bit lower impact in the early game, but definitely much better in the late game, especially for mage compositions. Assassins, it's kind of like Morphling's in jail every day, but he was kind of an oddball in assassin compositions anyway. So really he was just there as like, oh, I guess he's an assassin that I can run to complete the alliance, but you generally didn't really care too much for his primordial tag or his magic damage output. It was fine on its own, but it didn't really synergize. So it's more just like a numbers issue here as opposed to a synergy build related issue. But definitely a big buff there to mages. On the other hand, we've got Weaver, nerf to Hunters, essentially, changed from Hunter to Elusive. And these are the two alliances that we really said were the least affected by the jail system that they've reworked. Assassins and Hunters, who just have so many excess units that they can afford to lose one unit. And basically, they're going to lose one unit permanently. Weaver is now an Elusive unit. The attack damage has been rather substantially buffed from a minimum of 45 up to 60, minimum or maximum of 50 up to 75, and that kind of scales up throughout every level. So the attack damage has been buffed and is now an Elusive. And Shikuchi will no longer cast while evading unless they're about to receive magic damage. Basically, this means if you've procced the Elusive bonus, Weaver is going to stand there and continue to attack rather than like scurrying away. I'm really interested to see how 6 Elusive builds may come out of this. Now there's more Elusives. I think one of the biggest disappointments of the big update was that Elusive builds just fell off the face of the earth. They seem really powerful. In my initial review, I said, oh, Elusive seems really strong, but then you realize that they lost Treant Protector, they lost Nature's Prophet. So they really lacked any kind of strong front line to really give them that build around characteristic. Instead, they just had all damage dealers, and they still do, but now there's a little bit more. You know, obviously Weaver being an Elusive unit. And I'm hopeful to see that maybe some kind of 6 Elusive build can come out of this. It'll probably still be with Assassins, since you can easily get 3 Assassins along with the Elusives, with Anti-Mage, Phantom Assassin, and Templar Assassin. But we'll have to see how Weaver and some other units fit into that. And finally, we've got a couple of item changes. Helm of the Undying fixed some bugs where it was not dealing end-of-round damage. Pretty minor there. The biggest one, though, they saved the best for last. Smuggler has been removed from the game. I'm going to miss Smuggler, but it was such a powerful item that if you watch my recent tier list video on items, I said Smuggler was just far and away absolute best tier 2 item in the game, not close. And it's a little sad to see it gone because you don't get to play with it anymore, and it's going to make things like tier 5 items much more rare. You won't be able to get them until round 35, and with the increased game or the decreased game length because of the increased player damage from end of round damage, that might be a bit harder than it has been in the past couple patches here. So overall, I think Smuggler was definitely an interesting design based on the item system, but it was definitely far too powerful, and it's not designed in such a way that you can say, oh, I'm just going to tweak its numbers a little bit, like you could on other items. I'll reduce its armor value or increase its cooldown or whatever, like you can tinker with. Smuggler is like pretty cut and dried without getting like too wordy about like, oh, you increase by this percentage. They pretty much just had to remove it from the game in order to nerf it. And, you know, it's unfortunate that it came to that, but I think it was too good and probably well-deserved. I'm going to miss it because it was one of my favorite items, but I'm sure that it's better for the game that it is gone. So that's a lot of really, really, really big changes. Not only the hero changes, but the changes to the way the Underlords work, the changes to the way the jail works, and just all kinds of stuff. There's going to be a lot of improvements, I think, in the game, and I am very excited to see how this pans out here. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.